Welcome to the Willard Morrison channel. Today, I would like to introduce you to the story, Worlds Collide. Author, crazy_fan_girls. Read by, Willard Morrison. Chapter 1. Just 2 weeks ago a boy in your class disappeared without a trace or explanation. He never meant anything to you, but you had this urge to try and help find him. You've always wanted to become a detective when you were older, so you decided to try and solve the case. Your friends thought it was strange and decided not to help, leaving you on your own. If you had a bit of help you could have already found a lead. Files lay on your bed as you looked through them again. It was everything to do with the case of the boy's disappearance. You opened his personal file for probably the 12th time that day. He was very cute and mysterious. He had blonde and fluffy hair that stuck up and bright eyes that held a positive light. He wore a mask covering his face, which made you wonder what he could be hiding underneath. You assumed that there was probably some sort of scar or that maybe he wasn't attractive and he was trying to cover that up. Anyway, the mask covering his face in every current known picture of him would make it difficult to spot him if he were to appear. Today you were off of school since it was a Saturday. Your parents were out with some of their friends for brunch, so they wouldn't be back for quite some time. This isn't working. I better try something else. You thought as you collected the files and organized them into a neat pile. You decided that you probably would have more luck if you checked out the scene he was last known to be, in a desert in California, just a couple miles from your home. Apparently he was going to see the random burger Epic Games decided to leave out there. Epic Games left a large burger mascot out in the desert to advertise their game, Fortnite. Fortnite was one of your favorite games and you usually liked to end your day playing a couple of matches. You were very good at the game. You texted your mother to let her know that you were going out. You walked into the kitchen and grabbed the keys to the family golf cart, and went outside to start it. The drive was going to be about 10 minutes, so not too bad. 10 minutes later. The drive was uneventful. You eventually reached the spot where the mascot burger was. You found that it was gone, which confused you since you had seen it a few weeks ago. You got out of the golf cart and walked around. As you got out, metal crunched under your foot. You looked down to see an empty spray paint can that had the symbol of an Egyptian cat. You remembered that the boy was obsessed with Egyptian history, even though he was one of the popular kids. This was his symbol. You heard a crackling noise and you turned around to see a crack. It sparked with energy, and you were subconsciously drawn to it. You reached out your hand, and then you were engulfed with light. Chapter 2. You couldn't see anything for a few seconds and just felt the sensation of the ground falling from beneath your feet, as though you were falling through air. You heard wind rushing past your ears and you realized you weren't imagining it. You were literally falling. You screamed as the ground came closer. Just as you were about to hit the ground, a blue object flew through the air and caught you. You flew down to the ground and looked to see who your savior was. You were shocked to see that their face was covered with a silvery plate and had glowing blue eyes, like a robot. He set you down and took a few steps back. Another one, huh? He said wearily. He sighed and scanned you. Literally. A beam went over your body and you felt this tingly feeling. Sorry about that, I had to make sure you weren't dangerous. It's okay, but where am I? You asked. You looked around, realizing you were in some sort of a forest. That'll be explained soon, he replied. My name is Carbide. Follow me, I will take you somewhere you will be safe. You weren't sure if you could trust him, but following him was a better alternative than staying in the dark forest. The walk was very quick and Carbide brought you inside of a house. John. Carbide called. We have an emergency. The house was nice. You took a seat on one of the couches by the door. In seconds, a tall man rushed down the stairs. He opened his mouth to question Carbide, but then his eyes locked with yours. You felt intimidated. A scar ran down his face over one of his eyes, which were stormy, cold, and pale. He looked like someone who could be potentially dangerous if you got on his bad side. I see, he said quietly. He took a moment to consider you. My name is John Wick. I'm YN, you replied, but then regretted it. He gave you a steely look that made you shrink in your seat. You probably were transported here through a crack, he explained. The worlds are colliding. Things are here that belong in different universes, such as you. You're now on Fortnite Island. No way, you muttered. This was impossible. Fortnite was a video game. How could you be inside of a video game? Where did you come from? Asked John. Earth, your voice cracked as you answered. Another from Earth it seems, John told Carbide. Just like the kid? Carbide muttered, mostly to himself. At that time, the door flew open and in waltzed in the missing boy. Hey guys, I'm done training for today. The boy exclaimed. He looked over and locked eyes with you, stopping in his tracks. Why you? You jumped up. You're the boy that disappeared 2 weeks ago. You exclaimed, your voice going higher in pitch. This was getting too crazy. How did you get here? He looked as confused as you felt. The same way you got here, John cut in. Looks like you two know each other. Why you cut the boy off? He goes to my school, you replied. You realized you interrupted the boy. You wondered what he was going to say. Drift, you won't be getting any missions for the rest of the day, John said. So that was his name. Drift. It didn't make sense. You felt as if it wasn't his real name, but you didn't know what his name was. Oh, okay, replied Drift, clearly disappointed. Carbide, check if we have any extra bedrooms, John ordered. Carbide said nothing as he walked out of the living room and walked up the stairs. Drift, instead of taking a mission, I want you to help Miss/Mr. YN, get used to this place and train her for the next few days. Awesome. I finally get to become a mentor. Drift exclaimed. Does this mean I'm a pro? No, John said clearly. Drift immediately looked disappointed. Oh. Drift said quietly. You thought that his childish behavior was very cute. In fact, he was very cute in person. In school you never got the courage to approach him. I think you're pretty cool, you comforted, hoping to make him feel better. Drift looked over to you, an outline of a smile under his mask. You both stared into each other's eyes for a few seconds, before Carbide came back down the stairs. There's no spare rooms. Carbide started. You felt your heart drop. Where were you going to stay? But there are two options. She can either bunk with Drift or Abstract. I already talked to Abstract and he'd be alright to share his room. No, she already decided she'll stay with me, Drift said quickly. Your face heated up. I did? You questioned. Well, that settles that, John said. Drift, show her your room and go to sleep for the night. Tomorrow you're going to begin to train her so she can survive in this world. Drift nodded in response. John and Carbide walked downstairs. You wondered what was down there. So, want to see our room? Drift asked. Yeah, but why did you tell Carbide that I already decided to stay with you? You asked. I really don't know, Drift replied casually. He started walking up the stairs. Come on, it's an awesome room. He practically ran up the stairs and almost tripped on one. You smirked and followed him. He brought you down the hall, to the last room. When he opened the door, you looked around. It was a nice room. He had a bookshelf full of good books back from Earth. Somehow this place had the same books. On top of the bookshelf he had a lot of spray paint cans. No surprise there. There was a television in the corner of the room, though there was only static on the screen. Hopefully it would work later. A guitar hung on the wall above the bed. The bed. Only one bed. Shit, you muttered under your breath. Drift stared at the bed. Looks like we'll be sharing, Drift stated bluntly. Ah. You couldn't think of what to say. There was really nothing to say, anyway. Either you took the floor or shared the bed. The bed was a better option than the cold, hard floor. I guess so. Which side do you want? Drift said kindly. Then, he smirked. Both sides will be fun. You blushed. WW what? You exclaimed. Drift laughed. I was just kidding. Drift shook his head. Your reaction was worth it. I'll take the outside, so I can escape if I need to. Drift glared at you. Come on, I'm not crazy, Drift whined. But okay. He laid down on the bed, facing the wall. You laid next to him. Drift pulled the covers over you both. Your face felt hotter than it should. Thankfully, he stayed on his side of the bed although heat radiated from his body, making you grow nervous. This is the first time you actually shared a bed with someone. You probably would have been awake longer on a normal night, but tonight you were exhausted. You shut your eyes and fell asleep in minutes. Chapter 3. You woke up just as the sun was rising. You jumped out of the bed, surprised. You didn't recognize the room you were in. It wasn't your bedroom. You then remembered the previous day and your heart dropped as you realized this wasn't a whole crazy dream. Drift wasn't here. You walked out of the room and downstairs. Before you could comprehend what was happening, there was a gun in your face. A pistol, to be specific. A girl with a red dress that was rather high and brown, beautiful hair and piercing eyes glared at you dangerously. Who are you? She snapped. How did you get in? There were a few others behind her, such as a guy in a blue and grey hoodie, a mask covering the lower part of his face. Paint splattered his clothes. A girl with a similar style stood next to him. You stammered, unable to speak. Either you tell me now, or I pull the trigger and end your game, the girl threatened. Valor, stand down, John shouted. You felt relieved as you saw him walk into the room. You were safe. But Valor tried to protest. That's an order, snapped John. Valor groaned and gave you a look of pure loathing as she put down the pistol. Who is this noob trash? Valor asked. You opened your mouth to make a comeback, but John gave you a glare that made you change your mind. This is, YN. She came from Earth, like Drift, John explained. She'll be staying in Drift's room, and Drift will be training her. Cool, I'm abstract, the colorful guy said coolly. He held out his hand, not for a handshake but a high five. You gave him the high five. I'm Technique, the colorful girl next to him said. She gave you a high five as well. I'm Valor. You cut her off just to piss Valor off. She glared at you. Yes, she said slowly. The best female on the team. And the prettiest. Technique rolled her eyes and gave you a look that told you that you shouldn't take any of what Valor says seriously. All right, you replied submissively. You knew her type. She was like the high school mean girl that would hurt anyone who fought with her. Now, I want you three to go down to Tilted Towers. There is a disturbance and I suspect it has something to do with Omega, John commanded to the three you just met. They all nodded silently and left. John turned to you. Drift should be back shortly. I sent him out to take care of a burglary. So, is this some sort of police department? You asked unsurely. I guess you could call it that, John replied. We protect the people of this island. I've always wanted to become a detective. Maybe I can help around here, you said. John nodded. After your training we'd be glad to have you on the force, John replied. He looked up. I see Drift in the distance. He'll take over from here. John went back downstairs just as Drift walked into the mansion. Drift immediately made eye contact with you and his eyes lit up. Hey, YN. Drift said with excitement. You took a look at his attire. He had a long-sleeve shirt with a red zip-up vest hoodie over it. The vest made him look stronger in a way. You tried not to blush, though you didn't know why you had this feeling. Hey Drift, you said with the same excitement. So, do you want me to explain the island? Drift asked. Sure, I mean I have played Fortnite, but it's so much different now that I'm actually on the island, you sighed. I felt the same when I first got here, Drift shook his head. So, this house is just outside of Lonely Lodge. Where Carbide found you was the Wailing Woods. You nodded. So, Retail Row is really close isn't it? You pondered. Yeah, Just straight ahead of the house, Drift confirmed. It took about an hour for you to understand the island and where everything was. Turns out Moisty Mire had been converted into Paradise Palms. Anarchy Acres was now Lazy Links, a country club. That was cool. Hey, how about I take you to Paradise Palms later on? I know a nice spot that you will definitely love, Drift suggested. You replied. Sounds good, you replied. So, I'm new to this whole mentor thing, Drift said unsurely. I think today I'll just teach you how to build. You nodded, disappointed. It would be cool to learn how to shoot, but you remembered building was very important in the Fortnite game. Follow me, I know the perfect place to practice. Drift drove you in a golf cart to the Wailing Woods, which would seem like a good place to practice since there was an endless supply of wood because of all the trees. Drift gathered wood for you with a glowing harvester that crackled with energy. He had his armor on still, making him look very cool. Drift dropped the wood in front of you. Hey, try to build a small house, Drift suggested. You frowned at him. That could take me days, you whined. I thought the same thing when I first got here. Try it. Drift persisted. You groaned. You picked up the wood and your instincts told you where to place the wood. In seconds, you made a tower base. You looked down at the ground, startled at the distance between yourself and Drift. Drift was clearly surprised even though the mask covering his lower face made it hard to tell. Whoa, that was awesome! Drift exclaimed. You smiled down at him. Really? You asked hopefully. I've never seen anyone build that well, except for myself, Drift replied. You giggled at his remark. You used the pickaxe that Drift lent to you and made your way back down to the ground, all evidence of your base disappearing. What are we going to do next? You asked. You're going to make more buildings, Drift said. Hours passed, and you were exhausted. Drift showed you how to build different things, and he was faster than you. At the end of the day, you felt as if you were so much better. The sun was beginning to crawl into the horizon. It's time to bring you to Paradise Palms, Drift said. He ran over to his golf cart, starting it up. You sat in the passenger seat, and he started driving. It took a few minutes of pure silence, but then you arrived to where he wanted to be. You were on a mountain that stood above the rest of Paradise Palms. You could see the sun setting in the distance. It was a beautiful sight. It's beautiful, you murmured. It really is, Drift replied, watching the sunset. I like to come here every day. The area reminded you of the California desert you used to live in. You felt sad. I miss home, you sighed. I never thought about home since I got here, Drift admitted. Now that I think about it, I miss home too. Since you went missing, the whole town went into chaos to try and find you, you explained. How did you get here? Well, I went to check out the debugger that Epic Games left out in the desert, only for a crack to appear and sucked me into this world, Drift replied. How did you get here? Oh my gosh, this is sort of embarrassing. You muttered. Well? Drift prodded you in the side, making you giggle. You were very ticklish. Drift's eyes widened as he figured out what he just did. He started tickling your sides. You fell onto the ground, laughing. Drift fell next to you. Stop it. You said in between giggles. Not until you tell me, Drift teased. I give. You exclaimed. Drift stopped tickling you, but neither one of you moved. You stared into each other's eyes for a few moments. You blinked and snapped out of it, sitting up. Well, I actually got here because I decided to do some detective work and tried to find you. I ended up being sucked in the same crack. Oh wow, Drift said. I'm glad there is someone familiar here. You smiled and nodded. You noticed the stars were starting to come out, and laid back next to Drift. It's a nice night, you stated. Yeah, but we better start heading back soon, Drift replied. He folded his arms behind his neck. Let's just stay for a little while longer, you insisted. Drift didn't protest. You both lay there, staring at the beautiful night sky. Without meaning to, you dozed off. Chapter 4. Your eyes opened and your heart jolted as you realized the sky had a pink glow, meaning it was the beginning of sunrise. You and Drift totally forgot to go back to the house by Lonely Lodge. You tried to sit up, but something heavy was keeping you down. You looked down and realized that Drift's arms were wrapped around your waist. You didn't know what to do, so you decided to just lay there and go with it. Drift suddenly pulled you closer to him, making you blush. Drift buried his face in your hair and let out a deep breath. He was obviously awake. But you decided to mess with him and pretend you were asleep. Drift suddenly shifted away, and the cold air made you shiver. "Yn, wake up, we have to go back," Drift said rather loudly. You jumped, startled. "Oh, okay," you replied. You both sprinted to the golf cart, both hoping that neither John Wick or Carbide had noticed your absence. The drive was silent and awkward. You had no idea what to say anyway. You pulled into the sidewalk in front of the house outside of Lonely Lodge. You attempted to go inside without being noticed, but failed. Waiting for you was not John or Carbide, but Valor. "What were you guys doing out all night?" she asked, her voice laced with venom. "We accidentally fell asleep when I showed her a place," Drift explained quickly. "It was only a mistake, and we came back as soon as we woke up." Valor rolled her eyes. "Well, I do owe you a favor since you picked me up after I was knocked down during the last fight with Omega," Valor sighed. "I won't say a thing to John or Carbide, but don't be stupid." Valor was mean for the most part, but maybe she had some nice parts to her. You smirked. "Thanks, Valor," you said. Valor looked at you with cold eyes. "Don't get any ideas, noob," Valor hissed. "I'm doing this for Drift, not you." You frowned, wondering why she was being so hostile to you. "All right, ladies, let's not fight over me," Drift said playfully. You and Valor both sent a glare in Drift's direction. "Stop talking before I decide to end your game," snapped Valor. "Besides, I'd win automatically if I actually wanted to go for you. Thankfully, I have bigger targets on my mind." She smirked and strutted away, leaving Drift awestruck. "Be better? Than me?" Drift stammered. "Yeah, there are guys who are better than you," you teased playfully. Drift narrowed his eyes at you. "Sure," he replied sarcastically. "I'm the best." He flexed his arms. His long sleeves tightened on his muscles. You didn't know why you found him so attractive. "So, what now?" you asked. "Well, maybe we could sleep for a little while longer," Drift suggested. "The sun is only just starting to come up, meaning it's going to be a couple hours before the force will get to business for the day shift." "Wait, there's a night shift?" you questioned. "Yeah, but that's for the most advanced members since apparently the night shift is the most dangerous shift." Drift had a dreamy look in his eyes. "Hopefully one day I will get to work the night shift. Maybe then Mr. Wick will treat me like an adult instead of a child." "Hate to rain on your parade, but we're still children," you giggled as Drift huffed and crossed his arms prettily. "No we're not," he pouted. This caused you to laugh harder. Drift's eyes lit up as he realized he was the reason to your burst of joy. "You're just proving my point," you exclaimed. "Can we go to sleep now?" asked Drift as he yawned. "I usually like to sleep until after the sun rises." "Sure, pretty boy," you teased, poking him on the forehead as you started to walk up the stairs. "AWWW, you think I'm pretty?" Drift gushed, practically shouting. "Come on man, I'm trying to sleep here," called the drowsy voice of Abstract. "Sorry Abstract, I was just. Drift groaned. You smirked and shook your head, going into your room, Drift following behind. You fell asleep quickly. You felt content with this small nap. A few hours later, Drift's alarm clock went off. Your eyes flew open, and you tried to sit up. Then, you realized something was pulling you down. Specifically around your waist. You looked down and saw that Drift's arms were wrapped around your waist. Again. What was with him and cuddling? You tried to squirm your way out of his arms, but then his grip got tighter. Just 5 more minutes, Mum. Drift muttered sleepily. His chin rested on the top of your head. He apparently wears his mask while he sleeps. This pillow is so comfortable. He nuzzled into your hair. You blushed. You are Drift? You squeaked. Drift jumped, his arms immediately pulling away. Sorry. I thought you were a pillow. Drift tried to justify, clearly embarrassed. He jumped out of the bed. Hey. I'll make it up to you. How about we go to Greasy Grove and I get you some pizza? Sounds good to me, let's go, you replied. Great. Let's go. Drift exclaimed, practically running out of the room. How did this guy have so much energy after just waking up? You even felt tired. You felt excited that you were going to get pizza with him. Was this a date? Chapter 5. Drift was flustered during the whole journey to Greasy Grove, which was all the way across the map. The trip was short thanks to Drift's golf cart. You remembered when you were back on Earth that Greasy Grove was one of your drop hotspots when you played Fortnite. It was fun to see all your favorite places in person. You never thought this could be possible. Here we are, Drift stated nervously. He took off his red jacket and stuffed it under the golf car seat, before getting out of the golf cart. You followed him to the pizza place. Hey, you go ahead and find a place to sit. I'll order. All right, you replied shortly, looking around. The place was a little busy, but there were open tables. You took a place on your right that was next to a window. You sat there, and stared at the guy Drift was talking to. He was rather attractive. Drift looked over to you as he finished his order. He followed your stare, tracing it back to the other guy. Drift's eyes darkened, and he looked very annoyed. You noticed Drift's change in mood. You were very confused at what could have put Drift into such a bad mood. You shrugged it off, giving Drift a grateful smile as he sat across the table from you. Nice choice to sit, Drift said. This is my favorite spot in the restaurant. Really? You asked, surprised. No, Drift laughed. I just wanted to see your reaction. Jerk, you huffed angrily, and stared out of the window. Hey, why are you being rude to the pretty lady? Asked the same guy you were staring at, except now he was over where you were with a pizza box. You blushed. I'm not being rude, Drift said quickly. It was a joke. Hey, little lady, the guy said, setting down the pizza box and leaning on the table. Wanna ditch this dude and come with me? She's my little lady, Drift muttered under his breath. You didn't hear him. No thanks, I'm perfectly happy here, you replied. A good offer, though. Drift sat up straighter and he had a cocky expression. Yeah, she's happy, but not that you're here, Drift started, his voice an octave higher. Thanks for the pizza, bro, but we're all set now. The guy scoffed and walked away. Was worth a shot. You heard the guy say as he took his spot back at the cash register. Now, we can enjoy this pizza. Drift exclaimed. He opened the box, revealing the delicious pie. Soon, the pizza was gone. You were sad that it had disappeared so quick. You were also confused as to how Drift was able to eat without you seeing his face. You hadn't seen it once. No more food. You whined. Drift chuckled. You're so cute, you know that? Drift teased. You blushed, not knowing what to say. Anyway, I want to get to know you. I want to get to know you too, you admitted. I'm pretty sure we could become really good friends. Drift's eyes dulled at the end of the sentence. Yeah, friends, Drift echoed, his voice low. Oh sorry, we're already friends, but you know what I mean, you added quickly, thinking that you would fix the problem. Drift quickly shook his head, light coming back to his eyes. Yeah, I'm sorry too, I just had a thought, nothing to do with you, Drift explained. So, do you remember me from school, before we met here? No, you replied. Drift looked disappointed. You then thought about what Drift had said when he first met you. Wait a second, when you first saw me when John introduced me, you seemed to know who I was. Oh, you noticed, said Drift. Well, it doesn't really matter since you obviously don't remember. Remember what? You asked. We used to be best friends back in elementary school, Drift said calmly. Your heart dropped. You're right. I remember now. You exclaimed, feeling horrible. I don't know how I forgot that. Well, we drifted apart after third grade, so I'm not surprised that you forgot, Drift said, trying not to laugh. Wait. You groaned. Did you just make a pun? Maybe, Drift replied. I guess it was just too punny. You buried your face into your hands, groaning. Stop, you moaned. Never, Drift glared at you menacingly. It's way too pun to stop. No, you put your head on the table. Fine, I'll stop, Drift said while laughing. Thank goodness. Now, it's my turn to ask a question, Drift continued. What did you think of me before you met me here? Be honest. You flushed, remembering all your bad thoughts about Drift before you came. Well, not all my thoughts were pretty, you explained. Are you sure? Drift looked a little worried. Yeah, I'm sure. I really want to know, Drift replied. So, I used to think you were one of the bad people, you said bluntly. What do you mean? Asked Drift. You used to spray paint things and I assumed you did other bad things, but now I see that I was wrong, you replied. I'm so sorry, but that was how I used to feel. Oh, okay, Drift said, not meeting your eyes. You felt really bad. Well, that was before, you continued, desperate to make Drift happy again. Now that I actually know you, I know that you're an amazing, cool, cute, and funny guy. Drift looked back at you, shocked. An outline of a smile formed under his mask. Thank you, it means a lot. Drift was happy again. You succeeded. So, what now? You asked. How about I train you how to shoot? I'm sure Wick would want me to teach you how, Drift suggested. That's a good idea, you replied. All right, and I know just the place to go, Drift said. He paid for the pizza and you both walked out to the golf cart. Drift slipped back on his jacket. This next place I'm going to show you is absolutely beautiful. Chapter 6. Soon enough, Drift brought you to where you were going to practice shooting. He brought you to an old, broken house that was half destroyed. It was an interesting sight, but you didn't know why Drift would call it beautiful. No offense, but an old run-down house isn't beautiful, you stated bluntly as you hopped out of the golf cart. I wasn't talking about the house, I was talking about the view, Drift replied. He motioned for you to follow him, and you did. He brought you to the edge of the hill, and your jaw dropped open in awe. Below you was a beautiful lake, which you automatically knew was Loot Lake. But to see it in person made it a beautiful sight. The sun reflected on the lake's small waves. The water was a rich navy blue and looked fresh. Whoa! Was all you could say. I know, Drift said quietly. He let you stare at the lake for a few more seconds, before clapping his hands together, making you jump. It's time for you to learn how to properly shoot a gun. He took out a gun, which you recognized as a Scar. That's cool, you said, pointing to the gun. I've got one like this just for you, exclaimed Drift. He pulled out another Scar, dropping it on the ground in front of you. As soon as he dropped it, a purple aura surrounded it. It's not as powerful as mine, since it's epic instead of legendary. They're hard to find, so I had to deal with what I got. It's cool, I like it, you replied. You picked up the gun and the purple aura immediately disappeared. You were slightly disappointed since it would be cool to have a purple glowing gun. This is my first time teaching someone how to shoot, so sorry if I don't do a good job, Drift sighed. It's fine, you're new here too, you reminded. Right, Drift cleared his throat. First of all, you see those targets over there? There were 3 targets all in a neat row. You nodded. Well, they break automatically after you hit the center. Our goal is to have you be able to destroy all the targets by the end of the day. But what if I accidentally break them? You asked. Well, I'm not going to have you shoot at the targets first, replied Drift. First, shoot at those trees over there. He pointed over to a couple of small trees. You aimed your scar to the trees, pulling on the trigger. You were surprised that it wouldn't work. My gun isn't working," you nearly whispered. Drift groaned. "You have to put the gun out of safety mode first," Drift explained. "Oh," was all you could say. Your cheeks heated up in embarrassment. You turned off the safety lock on the gun and tried again. Except, all of your bullets missed both trees. You didn't even graze the bark. "I probably should have shown you a demonstration first," Drift rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed. "So watch closely. What you gotta do is use the scope on the gun to aim at your target, and shoot. Try not to move your gun too much so you stay accurate, and if your target is moving, move your gun to match their movements." He started shooting his gun, at first standing still. He started walking towards the right, keeping his gun pointed to one of the trees. The tree burst into dust. Your jaw dropped open in awe. "Whoa, that was awesome!" you exclaimed. "Something else to add, while you're in a fight, you should move around so it's harder for the enemy to get a clear shot on you," Drift added quickly. "Now you try." You raised your gun and aimed it at the other tree, firing. Most of your bullets hit the tree, though some flew past. "That's better, but here, let me help you," Drift said. He walked over to you, standing behind you, close. You blushed. He moved his hands over yours, positioning them into a better place. He shifted your arms into a more comfortable stance. Your face was probably more red than a tomato right now. "Try shooting like this. It's much easier." "Oh, okay," you stuttered. Drift moved away, and you felt extremely disappointed, though you didn't know why. You shook off the disappointment and aimed the gun at the tree, firing again. This time, you hit the tree almost perfectly, causing it to explode into dust. "Nice job, that's really good for a noob," Drift complimented. "Hey, I'm no noob," you hissed, punching Drift's arm. He laughed and rubbed his arm. "I was just kidding," Drift whined. You rolled your eyes. "Well, what now?" "Now, try to shoot at the targets," Drift said. You aimed your gun at the first target, shooting and hitting the dead center. You walked slowly parallel to the line of targets, taking all three out on the first try. "Who's a noob?" you asked sweetly. Drift looked amused. "That was nothing, just wait until a real fight," Drift smirked. "Don't worry, I'll protect you then." He flexed his arms, causing you to giggle uncharacteristically. "All right, thank you," you replied. "I think we should go back to the base now," Drift said. "Maybe Mr. Wick will have an assignment for us." You nodded. "That sounds awesome. He said I could be some use with my detective skills," you replied, excited. "We're going to be the best duo on this island," Drift exclaimed confidently. "Even better than Carbide and Mr. Wick." He ran to the golf cart and you struggled to keep up. "Don't go without me," you cried out as you jumped into the golf cart just as Drift was about to drive away. Drift laughed and started to drive away. The drive was short since you were by the Loot Lake area, which was kind of close to Lonely Lodge. You and Drift talked about his previous missions, most of which went successfully. You found yourself very impressed with Drift, more so than anyone else in your life. You really didn't understand why, but you decided to figure it out later. Now wasn't the time. You had arrived back at Lonely Lodge. Drift shot out of the golf car, sprinting inside. You followed him, excited. Wait," said the sharp voice of Valor. You skidded to a halt, just outside the door. Valor was leaning against the wall outside of the house. "Don't think you're going to do well if you're going on your first mission. You're much below average than all of the team's progress when they first joined." "I didn't ask," you replied sharply. "Everyone gets better on their own pace. Whatever helps you sleep at night," Valor yawned. You sputtered out. You stomped inside, only to be greeted by Drift and John Wick. "So you truly believe she is ready for her first mission?" John asked. "Yeah, she's improved so much over the last few days," Drift replied. "All right, but I'm trusting you to make sure she remains in-game," John said sternly. For your first mission you will be trying to track down the location of Ragnarok, the self-proclaimed god. He has arrived on our island and is a threat. Once you find his location, do not engage. Call me or Carbide, and one of us will come to take care of him. All right, sir. Drift exclaimed, though he looked a little bothered. He turned to you. Ready, YN. Chapter 7. You and Drift headed out immediately. So, where should we look? You asked. You took a seat in the golf car. Drift took his seat behind the wheel. I really don't know, Drift replied. This reminds me of this Norse village that appeared on top of a mountain on the map. You felt like slapping yourself for what he said. You dummy, that's the first place we should check. You exclaimed. Ragnarok is a Norse name. Well, excuse me for not knowing my Norse mythology. Drift scoffed. I only like Japanese and Egyptian history. Good to know, you replied sarcastically. Now let's go. We have to do this mission as good as possible. It's my first mission. I know, this is going to be awesome. Drift exclaimed. I'm glad you were chosen to accompany me on my first mission, you said sweetly. Drift's face was slightly red. Well thanks, I'm glad we have a mission together, Drift replied. You smiled brightly. We're going to be the best duo on the map, as you said earlier, you said. Yep, Drift replied shortly. You saw a tall mountain in the distance. You felt slightly intimidated. Wow, you whispered in awe. It was a beautiful sight still. Snow fell on the top of the mountain, giving it a magical appearance since it wasn't snowing anywhere else. You could faintly see buildings at the top. Drift brought the golf car to a stop at the bottom of the mountain. Well, this is where we start our climb, Drift said seriously. What? You exclaimed. I'm just kidding, I'll build some stairs, Drift said while laughing. You glared at Drift. You really didn't want to be sore after your mission. He started building as promised. You followed him. It took about 5 minutes, but you were finally at the top. As you were running up the final stairs, you slipped. You were about to fall off of the mountain, but Drift caught you. He wrapped his arms around your torso and pulled you to safety. You blushed at how close you were. You and Drift locked eyes. His face was flushed. Sorry, you stammered. Drift pulled away quickly. Your heart dropped. It's fine, let's just focus on the mission, Drift replied coldly. You frowned and followed him as he crouched and hid behind an old Norse-style house. You followed suit. You both crept around as sneakily as you could. You could hear the sound of a fire crackling. We need to decide if we should rule or work with these mortals, said an accented male voice. You perked up immediately. Was that Ragnarok? My lord, we could easily take down the mortals if we decided to rule them, said a female voice with the same accent. Huntress, you know how dangerous it could be if we underestimate the mortals. You remember last time, Ragnarok replied. We found him, you whispered. Drift nodded. You tried to move closer, but snapped a stick under your foot. The two went silent. I think we're being watched, my lord, Huntress said quietly. Indeed, Ragnarok replied. You heard no sounds of movement, but then suddenly someone jumped in front of you. You jumped backwards. Shit! Drift exclaimed. He pulled out his scar and started firing. You pulled out your own, firing. Your heart was racing. All of your bullets missed. Get a hold of yourself. You looked at Drift, shocked and hurt that he shouted at you. You blinked back tears and then fired as Huntress jumped to help Ragnarok. You got a few clean hits on Huntress. Trespassers will not be tolerated. Huntress hissed. Mortals do not get to witness Ragnarok's lair. Huntress fired her gun at you, getting a clean hit on your shoulder. Your shoulder burned and you cried out in pain. Retreat. Mr. Wick said not to engage. Drift exclaimed. You ran away, back down the mountain. Drift, wait, Ragnarok ordered. Drift stopped, against his better judgment. I don't wish to fight. I wish to make a deal. What is it? Drift asked, curious. You have potential, Ragnarok started. Drift was confused. What do you mean? Asked Drift. You could become more powerful than me one day if you had the right teacher, Ragnarok explained. How about we join forces? I could teach you how to handle your powers. All you have to do is help me. Drift was conflicted between his friends and this power. No, I can't do it. I have a place where I'm needed. Drift turned away, prepared to run. But do they truly need you? They paired you with a useless player. They only do that to expendable players. Ragnarok was confident he was getting through to Drift. Drift opened his mouth to reply, but realized Ragnarok was right. Drift understood that you were new, but he knew there could easily be something he could do that would help more than just training you. I gotta go, Drift stammered, running down the mountain. Do you think he will be back, my lord? Huntress asked. He will when the time comes, Ragnarok replied. What were you doing? Drift shouted as he came back to the golf cart. You got us caught, then froze up like a deer in headlights. This was my first mission. Of course I was going to make a mistake. You shouted back. You could have gotten us both killed. Drift exclaimed. I knew I shouldn't have asked for you to get a mission. You're nowhere near ready. You felt tears well up in your eyes, and you looked away. You jumped out of the golf cart. Drift skidded to a halt. What are you doing? Drift sighed. I'll just walk back. I don't want to talk to you. You shouted at him. Drift shook his head then drove away. It started raining immediately afterwards. Great, just great, you muttered. You noticed an abandoned shed ahead, and decided to take shelter inside. The storm was intense. The trees whirred and branches fell. The boards on the shed creaked. You really wished you didn't get caught up in your emotions and just stayed in the golf cart. You lay on the single chair in the shed, which was okay except for the fact that the spring was broken. It took a long time, but you fell asleep. You wished you were sharing the bed in Drift's room instead of laying in this dark and cold shed. What a bad day. Chapter 8. When you woke up the next morning, you felt a sharp pain in your shoulder. You winced and grabbed your shoulder. You had obviously slept on it strange since you had fell asleep on a chair. You massaged your shoulder as you got up, making it feel better. Outside it smelled like mildew and fresh air, because of the storm from last night. You felt a sharp pain in your chest as you remembered your mini-argument with Drift yesterday. You didn't know why it hurt so much. You have gotten into arguments with your friends, but they never hurt this much. Why was everything so different with Drift? You had only met him a few days ago, but everything was different with him than any other friend or guy you have ever met. You wished you had someone to talk to about this. Hello? Asked a female voice with a slightly high pitch. You whipped around to see a girl with green pigtails. What are you doing in this old abandoned shed? I had to take shelter from the storm last night, you replied. Oh, makes sense, the girl replied. My name is Zoe. I'm YN, you said. So what brings you here out in the middle of the map? I'm just going to the team in Lonely Lodge, she replied quickly. Oh. You could come with me. You liked her upbeat personality. Actually, that's where I'm living currently, you explained. So of course I'll come with you. Awesome. I'm so jelly, exclaimed Zoe, giving a little jump. The journey took about an hour, but since Zoe was fun, it felt like 5 minutes. You were genuinely surprised to see the house as you walked up to it. Here we are, welcome to Mikasa, you sighed. You don't seem so happy to be back, Zoe remarked. Yeah, I just got into a fight with a friend, you replied, hesitating at the word friend. Zoe had a small smile on her face. Maybe that guy you had a fight with wasn't just a friend to you, Zoe teased. You blushed, shocked. And no, he's just a friend, but we might not talk again after this fight, you replied quickly. First fight? No biggie, fights usually get resolved after a few days, she assured. Her words comforted you. Now, we have to get inside, this is kinda an emergency. You both walked up to the door, and just as you were about to open the door, it swung open. Drift stood there, bags under his eyes. He looked absolutely exhausted. I was so Drift started, but you cut him off. Not now. There's an emergency and my new friend Zoe needs to talk to John Wick, you interrupted coldly. Drift had an expression of a hurt puppy. You brushed past him, Zoe trailing after you, giving you a knowing look. At least give him a chance to talk to you, Zoe whispered. Just as you were about to go downstairs to where John usually was, he was walking up. Where have you been? I was just about to form a search team for you. John was angry. You felt bad. I'm sorry. I decided to walk back on my own. You started. Then the storm forced me to take shelter. Don't get so cocky next time. I know your mission was a success, but that doesn't mean you're invincible. You were shocked. You turned around and saw Drift awkwardly leaning on the wall and staring at you, as if to say for you to go with it. Guess he didn't tell John about how Ragnarok caught you both. All right, sir, you replied quietly, regaining your composure. Zoe is here, and she says it's an emergency. John looked over to your new friend, his eyebrow raised. This is the second person today, John said quietly. Tell me what's going on. It's Omega, Zoe replied immediately. Just as I feared, John said. Come with me so we can talk about this in private. He beckoned for Zoe to follow him downstairs. You were slightly jealous since you were there for days and he never showed you downstairs. Zoe gave you a pointed look as she walked downstairs, glancing over at Drift. You turned to him as they walked away. Come to my room for a moment please? Drift pleaded. He looked so tired and weak you couldn't say no. You followed him silently upstairs. He closed the door behind him. What is it? You asked coldly. You weren't going to let up easily. He shouldn't have blamed. Just. Drift shook his head. He moved towards you, his expression unreadable. Your breath hitched as you made eye contact with him. Without warning, he quickly wrapped his arms around you, pulling you close to him. He rested his head on your shoulder, which must have been hard since he was a lot taller than you. I'm sorry. You were shocked. You decided the best thing to do was hug him back. You wrapped your arms around him, and he immediately hugged you tighter. It's fine, we were both stressed out, you whispered. I realized after you were out of sight that I made a mistake, Drift said. Something else happened. It left me worried. What happened? You asked as you pulled away. Drift's eyes were filled with longing. I don't think I can talk about it. Drift sighed. I was so worried yesterday. When you didn't come back, I was scared. I didn't sleep. I had to take shelter since the storm was very strong, you explained. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let you leave, Drift replied. I realized something last night. Everyone come down. We have an emergency. John called from downstairs. For the first time, Drift looked annoyed with John for the first time ever. We better go, Drift said. You wondered what he was going to say. Chapter 9. You and Drift walked downstairs, your arms rubbing against each other because of how close you were. Downstairs, about 20 people were huddled around, waiting for John to start talking. Zoe and Carbide stood behind John. Zoe spotted you and Drift, noticing how close you both were. She gave you a cheerful grin. Omega has been spotted causing trouble in Tilted Towers and Shifty Shafts today, John explained. He has been game-ending a lot of innocent players. We need to form 2 squads to search for him and put an end to him. I thought you killed him. Raptor exclaimed. How is this possible? We don't know yet, John replied. I am as shocked as you. He also had a partner. She looked exactly like him and called herself Oblivion, Zoe piped up. Everyone started whispering, shocked. We need anyone who is willing to go, John said. Immediately, a lot of hands went up, including Drift's. You didn't raise yours since you knew you were not experienced enough to survive. The squads were picked, and Drift was not on either one. He looked offended. As everyone dispersed, Drift walked up to John. I'm one of the best the team, Why am I not going? Drift asked. You're exhausted, and you don't know Omega like most of us do, John replied. Get some rest today. You did a good job yesterday, and I'll send you out if the squads need any additional help. Drift looked slightly satisfied. He nodded curtly and turned away. I think I'm going to go get some sleep, Drift said, yawning after he spoke. He walked upstairs slowly. He turned to you and smiled. See you later, YN. You flashed him a small smile and felt a pang of sadness. You wished you just stayed with him. Yo, YN, said Abstract's voice from behind you. You turned back around and saw Abstract and Technique. Technique and I are going to Tilted Towers with some spray paint. Want to join? Isn't that against some kind of rule? You asked. Well, it's frowned upon, but nothing really happens, Technique responded. She threw you a paint can. Come on, have a little fun. We really want to get to know you. You nodded. Zoe probably headed back to her hometown, and you had nothing better to do. Plus, it would be a chance to get to know some of your teammates. All right, let's go, you replied, smirking. Sadly, unlike Drift, Abstract and Technique didn't own a golf cart, meaning you had to travel by foot. Most of the time they ran too. You felt exhausted and your feet were dragging as you neared Tilted Towers. You hated running. Where should we spray first? Technique asked Abstract. Clock Tower? Abstract suggested. He turned to you, giving you a small smile. I'm going to go to our supply stash. Be right back. He ran off to probably get more paint. So, you're the new girl, Technique said, but not with the meaning you originally thought. You seem pretty cool. Thanks, so do you, you replied, smiling. I love your outfit. Thanks, me and Abstract are practically twins, Technique laughed. She looked sad. I just wish I could tell him how I really feel. Oh, do you like him? You asked. Technique narrowed her eyes at you suspiciously. Hey, chill, it's just a question. Well, I do, Technique replied. And I'm guessing you like Drift. You both have been attached by the hip ever since you appeared. I don't like him? You said, but it came out as a question. Once Technique said that, it got you thinking. Yeah, sure honey, Technique spun the spray paint can in her hands. How many cans did she have? Be careful, rumor has it he's dating Sunstrider. Your heart dropped. Who's Sunstrider? You asked. You already decided you hated Sunstrider. She's Vala's best friend, Technique replied. She's a beautiful blonde who gets all that she wants. Sounds amazing, you said sarcastically. Technique laughed. Chill, she's not a brat like Vala, Technique said. Sunny is nice. It's only a rumor. Chances are, Drift likes you. You shook your head. I doubt it. He's just a nice guy, you stated. Anyway, we were talking about your crush, not mine. There's nothing to talk about, I just have to get confidence to tell him, Technique said simply. Tell who what? Asked Abstract as he came back with a duffel bag. Technique's face flushed, which surprised you since she was usually confident. Nothing. She said quickly. Let's get painting. She quickly walked away, and Abstract gave you a questioning look, but didn't say anything. You started painting the clock tower. You started painting a heart that had an arrow running through it, except the heart was cracked. You wrote your initials below it. You're not new to spray painting, are you? Abstract asked, impressed. All he did was paint his name with bubbly and colorful letters. Nah, but I never painted on buildings or public property, you replied. You all spent a long time, until it was night, spray painting buildings and having a lot of fun. A lot of the city was painted. You sure were going to be in a lot of trouble if you got caught. We better head back before Mr. Wick gets mad, you said. She's right, let's go, Abstract said. Technique nodded, her eyes still shining from excitement of today. You all headed back to the mansion. You all said goodnight to each other as you walked in. You noticed Drift was sitting on the couch, watching television as the three of you walked in. Technique and Abstract went to their rooms, and you decided to hang out with Drift. His eyes lit up as he saw you. "YN. I heard you went out with Abstract," Drift said, something off in his voice. "Was it fun?" "Yeah, I really got to know him and Technique," you replied, noticing he forgot to mention Technique. "Cool, cool, so do you like him?" Drift asked suddenly. "I don't mean friend like him." He had a suggestive look in his eyes, along with a dark expression. "No, why would you ask that?" You shook your head. "I just met the guy." "Are you jealous?" You didn't know why you asked. "No. I was just wondering." Drift replied messily. "But, you believed him. For some reason, you were disappointed. Was it because you like Drift?" Technique might have been right. You had to figure it out. You yawned. "I'm really tired, so I think I'm going to get some sleep." "I'll come too," Drift exclaimed, chasing after you as you walked upstairs to your and Drift's room. You both laid down, and you didn't have much to think before you fell asleep. Chapter 10. The next morning, you woke up and once again Drift was gone before you. You shivered, and noticed Drift's red jacket on the top of the dresser. Looks like he forgot it. You decided you would take it to him. You picked it up, then realized that it would help you since you were cold. You did what any logical person would. You put on the jacket. The material was soft and warm. You smiled and snuggled into the jacket, taking in his scent. It was a nice and sweet scent, obvious that he took the time to smell good. You liked that he took good care of himself. You walked out of the room and downstairs. Drift was nowhere to be found. Technique saw you as she walked into the kitchen, giving you a smirk as she saw you wearing his jacket. She didn't say anything as she disappeared. You figured she wasn't a morning person. You needed to use the bathroom, so you walked back upstairs and into the bathroom. As you opened the door, you saw Drift. He was half naked. His bottom half was covered with a towel. Your face went bright red instantly. Your eyes locked onto his face, which was usually covered with a mask. He had no mask on. Your jaw dropped immediately. He was hot. He had a strong jawline and perfect full lips, along with a perfect nose that wasn't too big or too small. He reminded you of a model. He still had a very youthful face. Drift's face was bright red. Sorry. I should have knocked," you said, your voice a squeak. You practically slammed the door and ran back downstairs. "Whoa, calm down," Technique said, her mouth full of toast. "What's going on?" "I walked in the bathroom on Drift," you exclaimed, breathless. "Help." Technique stared at you for a moment, before bursting out laughing. "Oh, you really got yourself into trouble this time." Technique couldn't contain her fit of laughter. She suddenly stopped. "Wait, does this mean you saw Drift without his mask?" "Why yeah," you stammered, recalling his handsome face. "Is he really ugly?" You felt annoyed when she asked that for some reason. "Of course not," you replied shortly. "Ouch, someone get out the wrong side of the bed?" Technique asked, before shrugging. "Looks like you're going to have to deal with your problem." She walked away before you could ask what she meant, because Drift cleared his throat and walked over to you. He was fully clothed, including his half-face mask that covered the lower half of his face. "Hey, sorry I should have locked the door," Drift said. "I forgot this morning. I should have knocked," you replied, your face tinted pink again. Drift scanned you over. "You're wearing my jacket," Drift stated. Oh, I was cold earlier. I just wanted to borrow it." "I can give it back," you explained. "No, if you're cold you can use it," Drift replied, an outline of a smile under his mask. "Thank you so much," you exclaimed, throwing yourself at him and giving him a hug. You didn't understand why you did it. It didn't matter. He wrapped his arms around you and gave you a tight hug. As you were about to pull away, he lifted you up bridal style. "Put me down," you said while giggling. Drift brought you outside. You squirmed a bit and laughed, but you let him bring you outist. He was very strong. He set you gently down in the grass. It was dawn, So the sky was a bunch of different colors. It was like a painting on a canvas. Whoa, you said quietly as you looked at the sunrise. Drift chuckled. Thought you'd like to see this to start your day, Drift said. So, now you have shown me both a sunrise and a sunset, you said, smirking. Drift nodded. Hope you don't mind, but I thought you would like to see this, Drift said. I don't mind at all. In fact, thank you, you sighed. You've been nothing but kind to me ever since I got here. Yeah, there's a reason for that, Drift said. And the reason is... There you are, Drift and, YN, John's voice rang. I've been looking for you. You guys have a new mission. This is twice I've been interrupted. Drift muttered under his breath. You were able to hear him. You decided to ask him about it later. This mission you're going on is to hunt Omega, John Wick said. Usually, I would give you more time to prepare, but this is an emergency. Yesterday, the squads came back heavily injured. I hate to send you out, YN, while you're still new, but we're desperate. Myself and Carbide have to go to Ragnarok's village to negotiate peace. All right, Mr. Wick. Drift said enthusiastically. He turned to you. YN, let's get ready and go in an hour. I'll ask Carbide where to find Omega. Mr. Wick had already left. It must be difficult to be the leader. Okay, you replied. You and Drift walked inside, splitting up to take care of the things you both needed to before you left. You didn't have anything much to pack. You grabbed a compact SMG and a bolt-action sniper rifle from the gun stash in the garage. You packed some materials to build, ammo, and a medicine kit. You decided there was nothing else to do, so you went to visit Technique before you left. You were extremely nervous. If this one person could leave 8 people heavily injured, you could be in serious trouble. You walked into Technique's room. She was laying on her bed, reading a book about art. Don't people knock anymore? Technique sighed and shut her book. The same antics made you walk in on Drift this morning. You flushed. Sorry, I guess I just have a bad habit, you replied quietly. Anyway, I'm here because I just wanna say bye just in case I don't come back from this mission. Technique raised an eyebrow. What's your mission? She asked, confused. I'm going after Omega with Drift, you replied. It's desperate since there are no other members can go after him. What about John and Carbide? Why can't they take care of it? Technique asked. They have to negotiate with Ragnarok to make peace, you sighed. Ragnarok probably only gave them the option today. Besides, I'm sure they would like to do this as soon as possible. I wish I could go with you, Technique frowned. But I've been given a mission. I better get going, you said. Please, survive, Technique said seriously. You walked out of the room and downstairs, and saw something that broke your heart. Drift was hugging another girl, who you assumed was Sunstrider since she fit the explanation. Be careful, Sunstrider said. She pulled away from Drift and met your eyes awkwardly. Excuse me. She looked down at the ground and walked out. Sorry to interrupt you and your girlfriend, you said, barely able to contain the contempt in your voice. You didn't like this feeling you were feeling. She's not my girlfriend, Drift said quickly. Oh really? You asked, sounding a little too cheerful. I like someone else, Drift added. Your heart dropped. Oh, you simply said. Well, we better go, he said. Yeah, the sooner the better, you agreed. You and Drift hopped into the golf cart, and he started to drive. You didn't know where, but you trusted that Drift knew where to go. According to Carbide, Omega was making his way to Wailing Woods, Drift explained. He suspects that Omega is planning on burning the forest to the ground. That's terrible. Yeah, especially for all the players that live there and in Lonely Lodge, Drift said. The fire could spread to Lonely Lodge. And then the mansion, you said. Yep, Drift confirmed. Don't worry, Omega may seem scary, but I'll protect you no matter what. His eyes were shining like a child's. You giggled. I trust you. Chapter 11. Wailing Woods was dead ahead. You gripped onto your gun as tightly as you could. You were absolutely terrified. You could die today. You looked around, seeing the world completely different. It was as if you were going to see the world for the last time. And it wasn't even your world. You would do anything to be back in your old world with your friends and family, with Drift there. Though, you would never have met Drift if you hadn't come here. He'd just remain the student that had gone missing. You had to survive for him. You weren't exactly sure how you felt about him, whether he was a close friend or possibly a crush. You needed time to figure it out. Wyan, don't worry, we're going to be okay, Drift assured, noticing how scared you were. He put a hand on your leg. I promise, I will protect you even if that meant I would die. You turned to him, and stared him right in the eyes. You both looked away immediately awkwardly. Thank you, you stammered. You felt better. But you weren't going to let him die. He brought the cart to a stop right outside the woods. We better leave this here, Drift said. It's dangerous to drive in the woods. Okay, you replied. You hopped out of the cart at the same time as Drift, your gun ready. You grabbed the strap on your bag, making sure it was secure. He motioned for you to be silent and to follow him. He crouched down and moved slowly. You followed his lead, making sure not to step on a stick or anything. Any mistake could result in one or both of you being injured or even killed. You couldn't let that happen. Before you could process what was happening, you heard gunshots, and Drift tackled you to the ground. Your face flushed, and Drift got off of you immediately. You scrambled back to your feet. What do we have here? A voice asked. The voice sounded robotic, except it was laced with venom and hatred. Two noobs. I think I will finish you off quickly so I don't waste my time. We're here to stop you from hurting innocent people, Drift said loudly. You won't be able to stop me, Omega snarled. He revealed himself. Your breath hitched from fright. He was really scary. You couldn't even see his eyes from under his glowing mask. He raised a gun and started firing. You and Drift started fighting back. You tried to keep your cool, and you were successful for the most part. You aimed the gun straight at him. You got some clear hits, though a few missed. Drift's shots hit him accurately. Omega's armor blocked most of the damage, so he wasn't that hurt. He was firing at Drift, but realized Drift wasn't taking any damage, so he aimed for you instead. You were shocked as a spray of bullets headed your way. Drift never taught you how to dodge a bullet. You quickly built a wall, but not before some bullets had struck you. You let out a scream, blood starting to come from some wounds. Thankfully, they weren't deep cuts. They had grazed your skin. You mostly screamed out of fear of being hurt. Wyan, are you okay? Drift exclaimed, running behind the wall with you. Yeah, the bullets just grazed me. I will be okay, you replied. Drift looked relieved. Thank goodness. You stay here and patch yourself up and I'll hold off Omega. Drift quickly brought a medicine kit out of his bag and handed it to you. You immediately started to patch yourself up. Gunfire rang as Drift challenged Omega. You're stronger than I anticipated, Omega's cold voice rang. No matter, I needed a challenge. All the innocent people I killed just accepted their fate and fought back. You ran out to fight with Drift. He has help, too. You don't stand a chance, you retorted. Well, I can easily dispose of you. I can tell you're not as experienced as your dear friend, Omega replied. Without warning, he pulled out a clinging grenade, and threw it at you. Before you could dodge, it stuck to you. You desperately tried to pull it off, but it exploded. You shouted as you were hit with shards of metal. You fell to the ground and Omega shot at you, worsening your pain. These injuries were something a medicine kit could not fix on their own. Wyan. No. Drift shouted. Looks like you were unable to protect her. You were too weak. Omega cackled. Shut up. Drift shouted back. He managed to get a shot at Omega's mask, which cracked. Omega shouted out in anger and pain, before fleeing out of the woods. You laid on the ground, pain overwhelming. You saw your blood. You were incredibly hurt. No. You saw him stand over you, before the world went black. Drift brought you back to the mansion, getting you medical treatment as soon as he got there. You haven't woken up since you passed out. Drift couldn't get what Omega said out of his head. He believed he was weak. Drift couldn't protect you. Drift decided he needed to do something. He was unable to get stronger here. He had to leave. It was his only option. He had to get stronger. Next time he was going to protect you. But for now, he was going to have to be gone. Drift drafted out a note, trying not to let his emotions get in the way of his decision. He didn't want to leave you, but he had to. He had to do this so he wouldn't fail next time and get you hurt again. Drift was going to run away.